Hi again, Lubomila. How you doing?
Oh, great. Thank you. Really good to see you, Jessica.
Yeah, lovely to see you too. Okay, let's get stuck right in. I know everyone watching is keen to get into the meat of it, but before we get into that, would you mind giving yourself a very quick introduction and telling us a little bit about Plan A and what you do?
My name is Lubomila. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plan A. In Plan A, we use science and technology to enable businesses to become sustainability and ESG leaders. We have a software as a service platform that gathers a lot of data and then is able to give prescriptions to businesses on how they can improve and ultimately decarbonize and improve their ESG performance.
Amazing. And it's something that we at Whereby are so excited to be starting our journey on. But what inspired you to start off? What inspired you to kick off and found Plan A?
In 2016, I found myself to be on a beach in Morocco at a moment in my life when I was working in finance. I had nothing to do with sustainability, but this beach turned out to be quite of a special place because I ended up deciding that I wanted to dive into the topic of sustainability and ultimately pollution. In practice, what really happened was that I was supposed to be surfing. I wasn't able to on the first day because the waves were way too big. I was sitting on the beach and just reading a book. And at some point, I just looked around and I was shocked by the amount of plastic that the beach was covered in. I stood up, started collecting, and then 10 days later, I found myself absolutely obsessed with the climate change topic, and I couldn't let it go for a year. I educated myself, and I spent quite a lot of my time on the side of my job, really learning what the issue was. And ultimately, this was how the whole idea about Plan A kicked off.
Amazing. What an interesting story. That's such a like so different than what I expected you to say. That's amazing. What were some of the things that you learned over that year? Like what are the things that if someone was listening in now, maybe they're like the head of another company, what would what would you say in your experience should be the thing that really drives them to start their sustainability journey?
Today, any company that really wants to become the market leader of tomorrow needs to embed in their value proposition and in the values of their company sustainability. The reason for this is that we have a big challenge ahead of us, which is already in our reality, that is climate change. That has resulted into a lot of, first of all, legislative changes that are influencing businesses to change. But ultimately, there is a lot of concern on the consumer, on the employee side, and also on the investor side. So, in order for you to be really prepared for how the world perceives you, and also for you to be prepared for the future, sustainability needs to be part of how you assess yourself and also the success that you have. We all carry a responsibility towards the future, and for those that are business leaders and want to be relevant tomorrow, that is a must have.
Yeah. Okay, and if you're a founder or an executive at a company sitting out there listening to this saying like, "Oh, I don't think we need to worry about this because we don't have any offices or we're not producing consumer goods." What would you say to somebody that takes that mindset and thinks like maybe they don't have an impact on the environment?
I think there's still a lot of people that think in this manner, but that is actually something that is always part of the journey when this kind of a transformation is happening. What usually happens when we have these kinds of conversations with such businesses or business leaders is really, first of all, giving them a perspective on the scale of the issue that is ahead of us. And second of all, giving data about how businesses that have taken sustainability seriously today are making more money. And ultimately, if anything, that acts as a good key performance indicator for a business leader is that's definitely revenues, that's definitely bottom line. That data is enough to demonstrate that you need to take this topic seriously because there is no other way for you to be able to retain your employees, customers, and also investors because they would always find the same value proposition but with a sustainable angle to it. So it is your chance ultimately.
Yeah. And what are the different areas that businesses can really impact though when it comes to carbon reduction? Like are there multiple different parts of their business they can look at?
To assess the performance that you have today and your impact, you need to look into the different building blocks of your business. So, of course, you have your employees, they have a contributing part to play with their travels, with their commute, with their consumption. You have, of course, your facilities, your vehicles. And if the company is actually producing something physical, all of the building blocks for this product to come to life also contribute, including the suppliers, including the raw materials. Um, Ultimately, you can start unpacking all of these different elements and start seeing which of those you can immediately act on. Employees maybe can easily change their way of being by some policies changing related to traveling. Maybe you stop traveling with short haul flights, but rather always take trains. Um, when it comes to waste, for example, actually, we've seen with many companies that we work with easy ways in which you can eliminate waste by simply informing people about the impacts that their choices make, but also by introducing different products in the office or in the care packages that you send to your team in their houses if you work remote. And finally, of course, it's all about energy. You really need to think about energy not only in terms of your facilities, your vehicles, but also the one that maybe your suppliers use that contributes to your scope three. These are the things that you can maybe tangle first and then move on to the more complex topics. Ultimately, what a business needs to understand is that sustainability is a journey. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not a 5 minute exercise. And there's a lot of things you can do. No act is small enough or too big. You need to start tackling one thing after the other. And one step after the other, you would be able to see how effective your efforts have been and how inspiring it is for others actually to be doing this.
Got it. Um, One of the things to think about, I guess, is like, as a business leader, it is, as you just mentioned, like even small things can be really beneficial, right? But it's one of those things that it feels gigantic. Like it feels like this mountain you need to climb, right? How do you, what kind of advice do you give to business leaders and individuals about how to begin their sustainability journey? Like what's the one step that they can take to kind of start this? And how do you break this down into composite problems and solve those?
It's a really fantastic question, Jessica, and I'm really happy you're asking it because it always gets to this point, especially for companies that are in the beginning of their journey, that the task feels in some way overwhelming. The truth is that the first responsibility that you have is not really related to putting huge budgets on the topic or dedicating a full-time employee to it, but literally having the realization that there is a problem that you need to contribute in resolving. We've seen a lot of companies that come to us that have taken already the steps of, for example, setting up a recycling scheme in the office or just doing a little session with the team where people can openly speak about how they feel about climate change. For the young generations, there's something called climate anxiety. So, opening up about these things really allows for people to explain about their passion and maybe be willing to dedicate the knowledge that they have to the team and find ways in which they can engage. If you're in a leadership position and you're looking to get your team excited, get them involved in the conversation. That's the first step that you need to take and get their passion to translate in an action that you take. Maybe it's an event you organize where you discuss these things. Maybe it's setting up a monthly cleanup where you go outside of your office and you just create awareness about the waste management problem that your city has. All of these little acts are the ways in which you can start. There's no wrong way of doing it. If you're a corporate, you probably have some legal obligations in terms of reporting. But if you're a startup, you're a smaller
Yeah.
company, or someone that is just in the beginning and wants to kick off, any small act really matters, and involving others is probably the best way to kick it off.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that like, I very strongly believe personally, I'm not going to, drag whole of whereby into this, but like for me personally, right, like, I really like working for businesses that have strong values and that really like represent their values and really try to think about the kind of impact that they're having on people and the planet. One of the challenges with that is how do you present this externally, right? You probably notice one of the things about Whereby is we talk a lot about remote working, we talk a lot about flexibility, but we tend to be I think, somewhat bashful about some of the other things that we do from like a kind of ethics perspective, or thinking about how we treat people, for example. And think this is one of the first things that we've really done, where we've really gone out of our way to kind of publicly make an effort to talk about how important this is, how important this partnership is. And the reason for that, I think, is because I really see like greenwashing as being quite a large problem, right? This kind of performative social work. And in some way, I think, doing something for PR is, at least you're doing it. But what happens if somebody is saying they're doing things but actually aren't really living what we're talking about behind closed doors? I think that's a real issue. How do you think that, consumers and even employees looking to join a company that is similar to me, that care about this, how do you help spot a company that isn't walking the walk? Or a company that, what kind of questions can you ask in an interview, do you think, to try and find out if a company really does care about these things?
This is a really important question, and actually, it's really timely because tomorrow it's kind of tomorrow, meaning more in a metaphorical manner. Climate change is going to be unfolding in many ways in our lives. It already has been, but we actually are going to be living in a reality that is not going to be necessarily very comfortable for many. And for this reason, it's really important to have this conversation today. What we usually see in the cases where a company is actually doing the performative work, as you called it, I really like this expression, is that there's something fishy about the length of the process that they explain, either they've gone through or they're offering as a service. Sustainability does not take 5 minutes. It's not something that with a few clicks you figure it out. That is not to make people feel scared or concerned that they're never going to be able to do it because it's too much resources, it's too much time. Quite the contrary. As we spoke earlier, it's really about this one step after the other that you need to take. But the first way to spot if a company has done actually something meaningful is really to ask them, so what steps did you take to become sustainable? And if they say, well, we offset our emissions, when you need to ask, like, what are the quality of the credits? Like, how did they find that? If it feels like it really took them 5 minutes and someone was just given them money to buy a label, probably this is not the company that really cares about this topic and has embedded it in the values that they offer to their employees, or at least they sell. The second way to spot it, and that's been my way of investigating, is actually there's something called the internet that is a really beautiful source of knowledge. And there's a lot of information out there that gives really a lot of clarity about when a company makes a claim, like what stands behind it. If you see one page that has like a paragraph and like a few sentences, probably they've not gone through the work of understanding what steps they need to take, and they're not really willing to become a sustainability leader and decarbonize, but rather they're focused on just following the crowd and being together with this whole idea. And as an employee, in terms of the interview situation that you mentioned, I think asking a random person in the office in a chit-chat situation about what sustainability means for the company is the best way to test it, because in the interview, most likely you're going to be told the best stories, because these are people that are obviously trained to engage people on their values. But a person from accounting, a person from finance, anyone that you can mingle in a maybe drink coffee situation is a lot more of a fair perspective on what really values are being offered on daily basis within the engagements with the team. And these are the ways in which you can understand if this business really cares about that and if they're going to align to what you are essentially looking for.
That's really interesting. One of the things you touched on there, which I think is an important question for people listening who maybe don't know, is you mentioned carbon offsetting, which is, a very common thing for people to do now. You can like ticket on your plane tickets, pay $2 to carbon offset. What is the difference between carbon offsetting and carbon reduction, and why is this important to think about? Why is it important for a consumer, and why is it important for a company?
Carbon offsetting is the act of calculating your emissions at full scope 1, 2, and 3, and I'll explain what that is, and then compensating them by buying carbon credits, which are coming from certified projects that have either eliminated or they have avoided CO2 emissions from being created. Examples of such projects could be reforestation, it could be sustainable energy, where community somewhere in the world substitute coal with solar. So essentially, it eliminates a negative practice for a sustainable one. In the context of this conversation, it's important to explain what Scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is the emissions related to your facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 is the emissions related to energy, heating, cooling. And then Scope 3 is peripheral activities and purchases, such as purchase goods and services, which includes suppliers, investments, end of use of products, commute, travel, and many others, transportation, logistics. What decarbonization, carbon reduction means is really taking this calculation on the Scope 1, 2, and 3 as starting to take tangible actions to reduce your own emissions. So the first option is where you compensate with a project that is outside of the realm of your existence. And the second one is really acting on your own emissions and reducing them as much as possible. Today, there's a lot of companies that do offsetting, that also claim carbon neutrality. And one of the biggest issues that has been identified actually over the last few weeks in media is that carbon credits are not equal. If you buy carbon credits, one project that offers these credits is not the same quality as another, which means that you do not necessarily have a lot of opportunity to be as impactful as you want to be. The decarbonization is actually the only way for us to really be able to impactfully commit and contribute to climate change and essentially addressing the issues related to it as businesses. So ultimately, a business needs to reduce emissions. Offsetting is a way to kind of neutralize your existence, but it does not contribute by itself to addressing climate change.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think one of the things that I've heard from other business leaders before in the past is that, carbon offsetting is, well, we talked about this, is easy, right? It's one of those things you can easily kind of tick the box and say you've done it. And carbon reduction is hard and complicated and takes a long time, which is, always a difficult hill to climb sometimes when you've got lots of priorities. But one of the other things is this presumption that carbon reduction in any form is going to cost more. There's going to be this kind of like a dollar implication. In your experience, do you always see that to be true? Do you see actually that is a kind of like a broadly held false belief from business leaders? And how do we kind of combat that idea that like being more ethical is also more expensive?
This is an incredibly important question because this is a misconception that has now been lasting for decades. And I think it's a convenient way to think about it purely from the perspective that we haven't even delved into understanding how to decarbonize. Might as well just focus on what we really understand. We buy a bunch of trees and credits for them, and then it should be fine. One of the reasons why it is actually better for you to focus on decarbonization is because you are allowing yourself to start thinking long term. There's something that might be associated to short-term costs, but ultimately, if you eliminate parts of your emissions, you're eliminating parts of your costs. Like this is getting sustainable suppliers, getting maybe some parts of waste creation to be removed. I'll just give one very simple example. We advise our clients when it comes to like improving the sustainability of their office to actually buy a machine for carbonating water instead of transporting like thousands of bottles in their offices, because it actually is ultimately an investment. But then in the beginning, but then in the longer term, we've seen, I think it's more than 70% reduction in costs. This is a very prophetic example. I can go into like supplier improvements and also like transportation improvements, logistic optimization, energy consumption. And so like really a lot more complicated stuff. But really, it's about like shifting, first of all, the mindset about short-term versus long-term costs. The second bit is really to understand the externalities that are associated to decarbonization that are positive. Being truly sustainable is always going to be the only way for you to be perceived as sustainable. Only yesterday, I saw an absolute backlash that came out of a new campaign that is kicking off at the moment because of some of the events that are happening this week. That was essentially offering to people the idea that sustainability can be done in 5 minutes. This does not exist. And when people continuously increase their maturity of understanding what sustainability is, what does it mean to address climate change, how we can do this as an economic unit or an industry, so will people also start questioning the choices that you make. So focusing on low quality offsets is really something that you should consider as a reputational risk that maybe for the shorter term can allow you to claim carbon neutrality, but ultimately in the longer term is going to be questioned by your employees, by your investors, by the society that is looking into your actions. And then the final bit, which I think is again important to mention, related to like how do sustainability leaders think about decarbonization versus offsetting, is this whole idea of really embedding the responsibility within ourselves. It might sound a bit scary to think that we need to take care of climate change, but it is something that is going to be defining the leaders of tomorrow. And I cannot stress enough this, because at the moment what we see is this snowball effect of one company within one industry kicking off things and then leading the whole industry essentially to set targets and become sustainable. You can take the example of Tesla, that now 10 years down the line has pushed every single automotive company to have really ambitious targets and to be at the forefront of the decarbonization that needs to happen. This is going to be the case for any small or large industry, any big institution, and anyone that wants to be at this position needs to take care of decarbonization first.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, you said so many interesting things there. I think one of the things that this prompted for me, right, is really thinking about um, the I'm a very intersectional person, right? I believe that a lot of these causes that people care about are deeply connected, and one of the things that really drove me towards caring deeply about sustainability, although of course I have a deep concern about future generations and the environment. Part of my concern, the reason why I was really driven towards this, is the understanding that people in third world countries and developing nations tend to be those that are going to be the most deeply affected by climate change, which for me is unacceptable. There are many different things that I think different people fail to recognize in climate change and how that's going to affect the world and affect the causes that they care about. Are there any things that you see that people maybe like don't realize are connected when they're thinking about like, well, that's not my cause, or that's not what our business cares about, that actually you're like, well, this is a really interesting connection, right? Like diversity and animal rights and climate change, all these things are interconnected, and this is something that most people would be interested in educating themselves about further.
This is fantastic. I'm actually exactly the same as you, because I see the connection between things, and I find that all the ills in our society are deeply connected to one another. And if we start unpacking those, we're going to start to see that it really lies in a fundamental understanding of how to be good, how to be caring, how to be part of a community. And if we start understanding this, we're going to have a lot of an easier way of addressing climate change, gender inequality, anything related to respecting diversity and cherishing it for what it can bring to all of us, and understanding that we're part of an ecosystem rather than being the managers of it. I'll start with a very small example. At the moment, the way we speak about climate change is actually predominantly about carbon, which is really not the way we should be talking about it, because carbon is one of the worst emission creating factors. But we also have other emitters like methane. We have other issues related to water pollution coming from toxins, and so on and so on. If you look into what climate change is, you start seeing that this is thousands of little bad choices that we've made down the line that really have led from one to the other. The creation of emissions actually not only leads to the increase in temperatures in one place versus another in a totally correctly, as you said, disproportionate way in different places around the world. Global South is definitely a lot more experiencing climate change and also increase of temperatures, but also desertification and so on. So if you take the idea of like temperatures increasing, what this has led is the reduction of the capacity of our oceans to absorb these proponent gases. That leads to the loss of habitat for species in the oceans. And that loss of habitat means that the ecosystem is dying, which means that these essentially ecosystems that we benefit from for agriculture and also for the livelihoods of millions and hundreds of millions of people is actually a threat. And if you start unpacking all of this, you start seeing that here we're talking about humanitarian issues, about animal rights, about ecosystem loss, and also about water quality, and also about the fact that we're living through times where temperatures are becoming impossible to deal with, uncomfortable to live in. Actually, there's plenty of examples that I can give about how there's a domino effect with one bad choice leading to many other negative repercussions. And if anyone cares about animals, they should deeply care about climate change. If anyone cares about women's rights, they should deeply care about climate change. If anyone cares about climate change, they should also deeply care about equality, because all of these things are connected. And the only way we can actually make ourselves useful citizens of this planet is really to start understanding ourselves as an advocate for one of those, but in the context of all the others.
Wow, what a great way to frame that. I really love an advocate for one, but in the context of all the others. I think that's a really brilliant way to think about it. It also, like, looping back into what we said before, like, it does make that you know, that big mountain to climb feel much smaller, right? It's like, if I'm advocating for any one of these things, that I'm doing the work for all of them. But being an advocate also means, you know, being responsible in the kinds of companies that I work in, or the kinds of companies I work for, or the kind of company that I'm building, which I think is really important. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, and I feel like you and I could probably talk about this for a very long time, and I'm sure you do all day. So I'm sure you're ready to get away and have your breakfast. But just to wrap up, one last thing, right? Is the a lot of people out there hopefully are watching this because they themselves are deeply interested in sustainability, and they want to know, like, what is Whereby doing, this company that I'm interested in working with, or that I'm interested, you know, in following or hearing more about, or Plan A, and they're watching this because this is something that they want to do. But if you're going to tell that person or me to go and have a conversation with someone else that's skeptical or maybe not so interested, what would be the thing that you would want them to say to someone else to get them to pay attention?
I want to circle back to what we just discussed, because I find the best argument to get someone to be concerned about climate change is really to understand what they care about already. Because it really is about finding the connectedness between the issues, but also finding the connection and this bridge that can bring you to the heart of this person and maybe to the concerns that they have. Maybe the place where they were born is already experiencing climate change, but they actually care about the poverty that the particular community is experiencing. Maybe they come from a really privileged background and they've never experienced climate change, but their family's work is related to agriculture. And for all of these discussions, there's an argument to be made about the repercussions that they're going to be happening in the coming months or years, that would essentially lead to climate change becoming even more prominent of a topic. And it really takes a lot of knowledge to be able to jump into any of these contexts and find your way to link into climate change. But ultimately, finding the way to connect to this person through what they care about has, at least for me, worked the best, because then you don't need to try to change someone's mind. You just need to give them the chance for them to see themselves in your cause.
I love that. I think that's a really nice way to frame it. Like I 100% agree. I am still, but in my past have been an extremely radical preachy vegan, and I've realized with time that the approach has to be slight. It's been softened. Let's put it that way. But I do definitely understand and appreciate that. So I really thank you for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I am just absolutely thrilled that we are having the chance to work together. And I'm really excited about seeing how we get on for the next couple of months working with Plan A and the progress that we get to make and we get to see happen. I know this is something that really matters a lot to not only our team, but hopefully also all of our customers out there as well. We're selling to a demographic, a lot of developers and founders of businesses, and people building products who maybe don't fully understand the implications of, like you said, uh, the work that they're doing or the things that they're building, because it feels a little bit far removed from them, and they don't realize that server costs can be, sorry, the server's impact on the environment can be as high as they can. So hopefully this is enlightening to our customers, and also our team will find some happiness in knowing that we're really thinking about this. So I really appreciate you offering up the platform as a chance for us to improve and do better.
It's really a great honor to work with you because of the commitment that you have made and the excitement that I've seen in all the conversations we've had. So thank you so much. And thank you for this conversation.